Hello, my friends. Today we are going to change the format up a little bit, and instead of having a scripted video, I'm just going to kind of talk about this more off the cuff. So the photography competition or the art competition in general. And I'm going to start by telling you a story about something that happened to me recently in regards to an art competition. So I've entered these in the past, and some of them I've done well in, and others, don't go anywhere, and that's to be expected. Obviously, anytime you're entering any kind of call for entry, there's a chance that you won't get in, but there's also a chance that you will, so that's kind of like the draw, right? You know that maybe, just maybe, it's going to work out. And some of these can be totally legitimate, but I kind of had a pretty bad experience with one very recently. So this is with the Beautiful Bizarre Art Prize. So I'm sure many of you have probably heard about this because it's been something they've been building up for a while to get people to submit to. And I'm not saying that I don't like the work in Beautiful Bizarre, because I do, and that this isn't like necessarily like kind of an assault on them or my way of saying that, yeah, you should boycott them or whatever. But I do think that my experience with this was negative, and for some pretty good reasons. So this is what happened. So I saw this competition popping up, but I noticed when I was looking through their frequently asked questions that they had a strange definition of how they were kind of separating the photography category and the digital art category. So I feel that my work is photography. It requires a lot of digital editing, but I am a photographer who uses my Canon 5D Mark IV, which is definitely a still photography camera, to create still images, which I create, completely on my own 90% of the time, either in my studio or on location or whatever. And then I take those images into Photoshop and I edit them together. And this requires a lot of skill from me in regards to photography, both in just, general image making, but in lighting and all kinds of things like that. So I definitely think that my work is photography, even though it does involve a lot of digital editing in Photoshop. So I went on their frequently asked questions, and it said something about if you're a photographer and you do any kind of what they called heavy editing on your images, such as removing the background. It specifically mentioned removing the background, that should be considered digital art rather than photography. And I thought that was really weird, because let me tell you how many images out there, photographic images, remove the background. I mean, that's like a super basic thing to do in Photoshop. Millions, billions of images that you see out there, the backgrounds have either been removed or altered, or subjects have been taken from another background and put onto another, or whatever, or combined, like you start with one image and then you're bringing in all these others. Like, this is just commonplace now. This isn't some weird, strange thing. This is just kind of a part of photography at this point, and I think a pretty well accepted one. So when I read that, I was really confused. So I decided I was going to reach out to them and ask about this. So I did. So I wrote them an email and I said, I just want to find out which category I should submit to, because I read this in your frequently asked questions and I think it's a little strange. And I explained to them that in looking through their site at the previous award winners, I noticed that almost no digital art category winners were actual photographers who were working in the subcategory of photo manipulation. So that would be the only subcategory under their digital art category that my work would fall into. So there's only two that I could find that had won any kind of award previously that had submitted as digital art photo manipulation. One won a second place award and the other was just an honorable mention. And this has been going on since 2018. Of course, they have a whole photography category, so it's not like they're ignoring photography. But to me, it didn't make sense for me to submit to the digital art category because my work just really isn't digital art. And while I do a lot of manipulation in Photoshop, ultimately it's not that heavily manipulated compared to what I was seeing in these other photo manipulation examples that I'm talking about. So I wrote this email and I asked them about it. And I was actually very surprised because they did respond back. It took them a little while, but they did respond back. And it wasn't just anyone that responded back. It was like I believe it was the founding editor of the magazine who responded back to me. So this wasn't just some random assistant or something. And she completely glossed over all of my questions about how they were defining photography. She didn't mention it at all. All she said was that my work would definitely fall into the digital art category. She also said that she thought my work was amazing and that she was excited to see my entry. So when you hear something like that, it kind of gives you this sense that, oh, like if this editor of this magazine is saying that they like my work, that might mean that I should go ahead and submit to this. That might be a good idea. So I did go ahead and submit to it. And this is a very expensive contest to submit to. It's $40 for a single entry. One entry. You can't enter multiple images. It's a very expensive competition to enter. I entered it. I actually submitted 3 images, so that means that I paid $120 to submit to it. And I didn't wind up getting into the finalists, which is fine. This isn't about me complaining about that. Like I said, there's been lots of other competitions like this that I've entered and I haven't gotten into. And I didn't complain about it because I felt like it was fair or there wasn't really any reason for me to complain and I didn't have this kind of odd experience. But it just like suddenly I kind of felt really angry because I was like, why did this woman not acknowledge my concern in the email that I sent? Because I think it was a very valid concern. And I think that someone who's not just trying to turn a profit off of the hopes and dreams of artists would probably have at least put something in there about, you're right, your work does kind of fall in this in-between space and that might hurt your chances. It just seems like that would have been more honest. And the more that I kind of went over the information, looked through the site, the more obvious it became that that was the honest answer. So I'm just, it's a conflicting kind of thing because like on the one hand, I'm like, oh, I shouldn't be angry. Obviously, this is just totally up to the subjectivity of the judges and all of that stuff. But on the other hand, I think that I was valid in my concerns and that this person should have acknowledged that. So that having been said, that story having been told, I think that you need to really, really, really be careful with photography competitions, especially within the last 5 years or so. I would say that they have become increasingly about, in my opinion, making money. They're not really about trying to help artists. They're about receiving a profit on the entry fees. And some of these contests are legitimate, so don't get me wrong, but there are many where to me it seems like for one, like the Beautiful Bizarre contest had sponsors, so it's not like they're paying for these prizes. They're giving out $13,500 in prizes that they're not paying a penny out of because they have sponsors, I think like iCanvas, ArtStation, stuff like this, ZBrush, things like that, companies like that sponsor it so that they don't have to pay for the prizes. The prizes are covered by those companies that are sponsoring the competition. And so I know like a lot of times you'll hear, well, they need the entry fees for administration fees. And it's like, well, let me just put it this way. So it's $40 an entry. If 1,000 people were to enter this contest, which I guarantee you way more than 1,000 people entered this contest, that's $40,000 right there. And that's if they only each entered one time, only put in one entry. If they put in multiple entries, well, that just keeps going up. So you can imagine how much money they're actually bringing in on this competition that's supposed to be about supporting artists, but is quite obviously about something else. So that's my advice for you, is just to be careful. And this actually kind of leads into another issue that I kind of have recently, which is specific to photography and the art photography world, the fine art photography world, is that I find that composite photography, photo manipulation, is not well regarded and is not well represented in the fine art photography community at all. So you can look at really big, important fine art organizations, like, for example, Center Santa Fe. You may have heard of them, or through Photo Lucida, they do something called Critical Mass each year, which is like a juried portfolio review. And Center also does a juried portfolio review each year. And they also give away grants and other awards. And that's all great. These are very legitimate organizations, and they really do help the photographers. They're not in it just for the money. I think they're definitely legit. But the problem is that all of the work that you see being accepted and represented through those platforms is essentially social commentary. It's borderlining on photojournalism, and it's mostly some kind of social commentary type work. Even the more unusual work that could fall into a category of like magical realism or even surrealism, if you read the artist statements, you'll find out that it has this slant of social activism, would be actually a better way of describing it, this social activist slant. And again, it's not like I'm against social activism in art or anything like that, but I think there's a lot more to art than just that. And I think, to me, it's interesting because photography has always had this stigma of not really being art, right? Like, it took years for photographers to finally convince really anyone that photography was actually art. And that now that we finally have these important organizations that are supposed to be helping artists are stuck themselves in the past in this idea of photographic art as needing to have this sort of documentary feature. Otherwise, it seems like it's without value. And I think that's crazy. You know, I think that if we want to say photography is art, then we should treat it like art, which means that it doesn't always have to be about social activism, and it doesn't always have to be about very specific social commentary, because I think that my work does in its way have those things in it, but it's taking it from a sort of like a meta point of view. It's going up to the psychological or the philosophical aspect of human beings and how we move through the world and how we interact with each other. And I think that that is a perfectly reasonable thing to talk about, even an important thing to talk about, because these bigger ideas are often what fuel the behaviors that people enact in the world, which cause these problems that we wind up having that require us to become social activists. So, you know, in my mind, it's all related somehow. But I guess I just kind of wanted to go on this little rant with you because it's something that I think about a lot. And because it's something that kind of disturbs me, and I wish that there was some way that I could help to build a better platform for this type of photography and this type of photographic work that I think is also very important and frankly is much newer. It's more pushing forward into the future rather than kind of stuck in the past ways of working. So I think it's time for us to maybe consider the modern era and how things are changing, and to allow these more modern digital techniques to become a legitimate part of the photography conversation. So this video is kind of like a two-part. It's you know, a warning about photo competitions, to be careful with those and to really do your research on them, and to try not to let that, what they'll sometimes call the shiny object syndrome, you know, get a hold of you, because it definitely gets a hold of us. It got a hold of me, and you know, you have this sense that like you need something to validate your work. Otherwise, how do you know if it's any good? And at the end of the day, you can't rely on those kinds of things, especially those big competitions. It's like a crapshoot who's going to win. You know, it's like if you can look through the submissions on some of them and you'll see like these amazing artists and none of them win anything. So it's really like so up to chance. And you know, getting caught up in that, I think, is a really bad thing. I think like if you're interested in getting your work out there, it's better to focus on calls for entry that are more for like gallery exhibitions. And you know, obviously you need to be careful with those too and do your research and make sure that they are legitimate. But that's a way to add those social proofs, those little things to your CV that you might need to add to just kind of get the sort of attention that you're trying to get. And you know, I don't think that we should you know, think of you know, ticking off boxes on our CV as like a reason for doing things. However, the reality of the situation is that when you're looking for certain types of work, or you're looking for people to be interested in what you're doing in a particular way, these are things that they like to see. This helps them to believe that they have some reason to think that what you're doing is actually of value. You know, maybe that's not fair, but it's the reality. So yeah, just be careful with the photography competitions, and let me know what you think. You know, have you submitted to any of these and had similar problems, or have you had successes? And if you've had a really great success, like, do you have recommendations for ones that you think are good? And just, you know, we can sort of start a conversation about all of this stuff. So thank you, and I will see you guys next time.